Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of St. Paul's Letters to America. I am your host, Ray Gerard. With me today in our studio is my co-host, Mr. Bob Hennekeys. Bob, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ray. It's good to be here as always. Thanks for this opportunity.
So, this is the program that asks, hey, what if St. Paul were alive today? What if he actually were? What if he was still writing letters? Maybe not tired of writing letters, still writing letters. And supposing he wrote one to America, knowing what is going on in our world today, and there's a lot going on in our world today, what would he have to say to us here in America? Well, we have the brashness to think that we know what he would say. And so we're going to give you such a letter from him today. And why do we do this? Why can we possibly think that, that we can do this? Well, it's very simple. St. Paul's letters were not simply the letters of St. Paul. They were, like all Scripture, inspired by God. And as Scriptures inspired by God, they contain truths that are timeless. They don't shift with the sands. They're not just simply that something that's good in one place or one generation and not good in some other place at some other time. No, they're good at all times in all places. And what, using such a letter from St. Paul, are we going to talk about today through the prism of one of St. Paul's letters? What are we going to hope to see perhaps more clearly? Well, we're going to talk about what everybody's talking about, the coronavirus. And what in particular are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to try to make sense of some of what seem to be excesses. People are reacting to this whole coronavirus situation in a lot of different ways. And, a lot of it is really being regulated these days by the government. Our lives are being regulated to a large extent by the government, what we can do, where we can go, what we can buy. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. There are a lot of restrictions. And if you're wondering, if some of this seems a little bit curious to you, like, for example, there are stories that come out about restrictions on individual actions, things that, small groups of people are doing, and they're getting arrested by the police. If some of that seems curious, why are police arresting people that are doing similarly innocent things? If you perhaps have noticed some stories and are wondering why, you're wondering, hey, that seems curious, as to, why religious practices in particular are being singled out for some pretty heavy regulations or restrictions. There seems to be a good amount of interest in restricting religious things, and you're wondering, hey, why? That seems a little curious. Also, if as I have been, maybe you're struck recently by all of these references lately to science. Governors are coming out saying, hey, we're going to be we're going to be basing our actions on science. Science. There's a lot of references to science recently in the public comments of these governors. It's becoming something of a mantra. And if you think that perhaps, well, maybe, they're saying it maybe, once too often, or maybe, with a little bit more frequency than perhaps they have before, you're wondering, that seems a little curious. Is it possible that all these things are connected? Well, we're going to make the case that yes, they are, and we're going to show you exactly how. There's a Russian mathematician by the name of Igor Shafarevich, and not only was he a mathematician and a man of some very significant accomplishments in the field of mathematics, he also took an interest in politics. He lived in the Soviet Union, and he became something of a political dissident. He was personal friends with a very famous and internationally famous Soviet dissident named Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And so they shared a similar sort of discomfort with the way people's personal lives were regulated and restricted in the Soviet Union. And Mr. Shafarevich did a study, a historical study of socialism. And basically, he said it's not a recent thing. It's not something that just, originated with Marx in the 1840s, where Marx said, oh, socialism is a stepping stone to communism. We've got to do socialism first. It'll eventually get us to communism. But that basically, hey, this is something that is a recent phenomena. And Shafirevich pointed out that no, it's not recent. It actually it's as old as time. He traced it back to the Incas, Egypt, the ancient Chinese civilizations. And it's in all its forms, ever since then, through all the centuries, there are several things that it had in common, that all of these various variations on this theme of socialism, all of them have had certain things in common. And what he pointed out was that he found they all had sort of an animosity against private property. And they all had an animosity against the family, the classic family as we know it. And they also had a certain hostility towards religion. These are three very common elements through all of these forms of socialism, ancient and current: property, family, religion. Well, here we're in the midst of a coronavirus. And what are we finding? We're finding these same elements. There are government restrictions on private property, the way private businesses can operate. Huge restrictions on private business. We are finding certain animosity against families doing family-type things. Why? And then we're finding actions against religious freedom, religious liberty. So is it a stretch? Is it strange? Is it a stretch? Is it too much of a case to make that, there's a socialist mindset that's at play here? And these things that taken in isolation might seem curious or make us wonder why. If you put them in the context of a history, this history of a mindset that is not really God-oriented, but is more man-oriented, that these things tie together, and then they begin to make sense. Well, St. Paul had obviously a very different frame of mind, and he had written a letter which is equally relevant today, in which he said, and we're going to play with this letter just a little bit and add a little bit here and take a little bit out there, but basically, if you'll allow us that liberality, what he said is this: slaves and all who have bosses or governmental authorities over them, be obedient to your human masters. Be obedient to these authorities in sincerity of heart as to Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. Masters, act in the same way towards those you rule, and stop bullying, knowing that both they and you have a master in heaven, and that with him there is no partiality. Finally, draw your strength from the Lord and from his mighty power. Put on the armor of God so that you may be able to stand firm against the tactics of the devil. For our struggle is not with flesh and blood, but with the principalities, with the powers, with the world rulers of the present darkness and the evil spirits in the heavens. So St. Paul's mindset was basically, there are things to be worried about, things that we have to contest with, challenges that we face here in our everyday life. But our real struggle is a spiritual one. And the primary, message that he's got here in this particular, letter is, the people need to be obedient to civil authorities, but those civil authorities have to act in the same way towards the people they rule. They have to be obedient. They have to be obedient to the will of the people. They have to have in mind the will of the people. They have to have a concern for the people. They have to stop bullying people because, and the reason is that there is somebody above. There is a God in heaven. That's what colors everything. And that's what, the civil authorities have to bear in mind if they're going to rule with justice. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to be talking about some of these government prescriptions that have come down and comparing them with this, game plan that St. Paul has given us. But are they governing justly? Are they governing the way they should? So that's our topic for today.
And I think, Ray, that's a really important thing. So we have 2 months ago lived in a fairly free society. We were allowed to go about and do our business in whatever manner we saw fit, as long as we didn't break the rules, the laws, and fit in appropriately. And then all of a sudden, this coronavirus shows up, and many of the things that we did are now restricted and not allowed. We're not allowed to go into our favorite restaurant and eat as we desire. You can pick up takeout. You can maybe have that delivered, but you can't share a meal. As a teacher, I was teaching, and I'm not allowed to do that anymore. Now I must film videos and send videos to the kids and send assignments to the kids, and they have to return that back to me. So I'm not in the classroom with them and not allowed to be there. And all of that sort of makes sense as I go along. It sort of fits. We're doing the right thing for people. We're keeping our social distancing. We're not spreading the virus, and therefore we are doing the right thing. And I can't help think that back to my days in China when I lived there. I lived in China for 6 years. There were a lot more restrictions there, and they scared me to death. It was obvious while I lived there that they had records that they were keeping of everything I said and did. They kept records of where all of us as expats went. They kept voice records of all that was going on in our homes. And I became very nervous about them controlling my life almost completely. But I lived in their country and had to follow their rules and did so. But in the United States, I have a different expectation. I have a different expectation that the folks here, the leaders here, should be worried about me and worried about everyone else in the common good rather than the leaders themselves. And it seems like maybe that's not always going that way. As you mentioned, it seems as if maybe they have a slant against religion. They want to be a little more harsh than others that they might be. And it does seem worrisome. It does seem like a time where the state or the government may take some liberties with us as people at a time when it sort of makes sense, but it still has to be disconcerting and be watched over and make sure that they're doing the right thing. I think we as citizens of the United States have a need to make sure that they are doing the right thing and voice our opinion when it's sort of out of whack.
Yeah, Mr. Shafarevich noted that the primary goal of the socialist mindset, the whole philosophy, it's an ancient philosophy. It's just two ways of looking at reality. It's based on a way of looking at reality that is in fact different from the Christian mindset. Now, the Christian mindset is one where all of creation is good, and the problems that we have in this world are based on people failing to live up to the desires and the plans that God has given us. And so it's our fault. Creation is good. Everything that God made is good. Okay, the problem is with us. And so the answer is trying to do what God wants, trying to be better people. And that is the age-old challenge. We just, have to be more like God wants us to be. There's another mindset, which is that people are good. People are essentially all good. And the real problem is the world around us. It corrupts us. If you're left in a primitive state, that the original human condition, everything was rosy. The primitives, the cannibals, it was all, pagan cultures. It was all, people were in their natural state, people were good. And it's society that corrupts us. And it's our circumstances that corrupt us. And so the answer is to be found on a social level. We have to fix those circumstances, fix those societies. And so it's just a very different way of looking at things. And God is not part of that picture at all. So, and the problem is, if society is the problem, if these social circumstances are the problem, and all we got to do is fix those social circumstances, what do we use as our roadmap? What do we use? Is Is there any overarching principle that says, well, you have to be good to other people? Where would such a principle come from? Now, in the Christian, faith and the Christian philosophy, yeah, that's easy. We have to be good to other people because other people are also created by God. They have just as much worth as we do. Everyone is created in the image of God. But if you don't have that as your basis, what do you use? Do you need to be as good to other people as they are to you? Well, the answer is no. And all of the experiments with socialism in other places in the world have shown us this. So in any event, it can lead to certain usurpations. It can lead to certain instances where individual freedoms are run roughshod over. It gives these civil authorities all kinds of leeway in order to do these types of things. And are we starting to see even, minor instances of that sort of thing here in response to this coronavirus, when government seems to have all of these powers that here in America, as you say, Bob, we're used to, not, having to deal with from the government. Well, if you haven't heard about them, for example, there are a variety of these little stories out there. For example, there's one in Little Rock, Arkansas, or a little suburb outside of Little Rock, Arkansas. It was a little small mountain community, and it was a suburb, and there was this little family, and there was this little basketball court behind their home. And this basketball court hardly ever got used by anybody but this one particular family. They considered it, in some sense, basically an extension of their backyard. They had to put up a net. They bought and put a net on the basketball rim because the city or the municipality didn't do that. There's always water on the basketball court. It would flood a lot, so whenever it rained and such. So the father actually dug a little drainage canal to help the water run off. They did that. The municipality didn't do that. Every 2 weeks, when there was leaves or other debris on the court, he would go out with his little backpack blower and clear the court. He would take care of the cleaning and the maintenance of the court. The municipality didn't do that. Why? Because no one ever paid attention to it. No one ever used it. But they did. This family did. Well, on April 6th, the 12-year-old daughter of this family was alone on the basketball court, just shooting a few, hoops. And along came a truck, a municipal truck. Again, these people never came around to maintain the court, but now they did come around. Why? Apparently someone had called. They had seen someone playing on the court. And so they came down and they took the rim and the net that didn't belong to the municipality away. Why? Why do this? Why was it necessary to do this? If we're trying to save lives, the rationale behind all of this is that you want to maintain social distancing. You want to prevent people congregating in groups because you can spread the virus. Well, this girl's outside playing all by herself. Why is it necessary not to allow her to play? This girl actually, told her parents, quote, well, they can take away my library and they can take away my basketball goal, but they can't take away my piano, close quote. So here you've had a little girl trying to make sense of the fact that the government, which is there to serve her, supposedly there to serve her, is not depriving her of some little pleasure that she has. And so she's left to, say, well, okay, but there's certain things they still can't. I mean, it's a little heartbreaking.
Well, you feel bad for everybody involved. You feel bad for the little girl that she doesn't get a chance to go out and get some exercise, and certainly that's something everyone needs, especially young kids. And you certainly feel bad for the father that's maintained this thing and taken care of it so that his daughter can play. What a wonderful parent that is to put that together and allow his daughter to be able to go out there and play and take the time that it needs. And then all of a sudden, someone makes a crazy decision, and that's all taken away for no good reason. There was nobody else there. Why would you do that?
I mean, why wouldn't the police, why wouldn't, when the call comes in and says, hey, somebody's doing this, why wouldn't the response be, okay, well, we'll check into it? Or, when the police go there, why don't they maybe go to their superiors and say, we don't have to, we don't have to do this. Where's the resistance to this? Where's the common human compassion that you think might normally be the case? Why is the default, it seems like the default decision is to exercise authority as opposed to exercise maybe some kind of kindness. Maybe we're blowing this out of proportion, right? This is probably just an isolated incident. Well, go to Brighton, Colorado. There's a man, he's in a park, and he's playing t-ball with his wife and his daughter. Now, mind you, the park has a sign on it that says closed. The sign also says, however, it says this on the sign. It says, quote, in groups of no more than 4 persons, parks remain open for walking, hiking, biking, running, and similar activities. Okay, so in groups of less than 4, you can engage in physical, recreational activities of some sort, similar activities, running, walking, whatever. So it's open, groups less than 4. Well, here's a man. He's playing t-ball with his wife and his daughter. Okay, you got 3 people. Well, that's less than 4. And we know they were alone in the park because when the police came, a former Brighton City Councilman named Kirby Wallen happened to catch this on video. Anyways, they were playing alone in this park, and the police came, and the little girl was afraid that her daddy was going to get arrested by the police. I don't know. I think I saw the video. I didn't look at it all that closely. I think there were like 3 or 4 policemen there, and the daughter actually said, quote, Daddy, I don't want you to get arrested, quote. But her father said instead, quote, don't worry, Daddy's not going to get arrested. I've done nothing wrong. Don't worry about it. And guess what happens next? In front of this little 6-year-old girl, these policemen put this father in handcuffs and put him in the back of the police car. You have a little 6-year-old girl. This is an image that's never going to leave her. I'm sure she's going to remember this for the rest of her life. Her father getting handcuffed by police. I mean, is this really necessary? That's what the councilman said. He said basically, it's hard for him to imagine. He said something to the effect that, here it is, the quote, I find it hard to believe that with all the things going on in our communities, the only way to resolve a situation like this was to handcuff a father in front of his daughter. And he's right. Why couldn't the police simply say, look, you're not allowed to do this, go home, don't do it again. We'll let you off with a warning this time, but don't do it again. Well, you might think, really? I can't play t-ball when there's nobody else here with my... I mean, we're maintaining social discipline. The father pointed out that the only people that violated social discipline in this whole episode were the cops. They put hands on him. They weren't wearing masks. They came in close contact. They physically... I mean, so what if these cops had maybe had the virus? They would have been spreading it. So why wouldn't they just give him a warning? Why wouldn't say you can't do this? Why wouldn't there be a little compassion here? Why is it like, no, here, put your hands behind your back. Why? Now, as it turned out, it really wasn't all that bad. They put him in the back of the police cruiser. He's, spent all of 10 minutes there before they finally, I guess, thought better of it and decided to release him. But, he was arrested. Now, afterwards, the police department issued an apology. They said that we are deeply sorry for the events that took place on Sunday and the impact on Mr. Mooney and his family. They are conducting an internal investigation as to what led officers to actually detain Mr. Mooney. It said also that it is evident there was an overreach by our police officers and so on and so forth. So they attempted to apologize. But, but really, why? I mean, or take the case, for example, of a mother who answered the door one night. It was 10 o'clock at night. She answered the doorbell. And when she did, she found that there were policemen outside. And then what happened was they took her kids from her. She had no warning. She didn't know this was going to happen. She just got a knock on the door, doorbell rang. She answered the door, and police took children out of her custody, away from her. Why? Well, she had been divorced. Her ex-husband filed an emergency motion with a local court, claiming that she was endangering her kids by potentially exposing them to coronavirus. Now, there was no evidence, at least nothing that's reported here in this story, that she actually had the virus. But, she was exposing the kids to undue risk because why? She was a healthcare worker. She worked in a clinic. My daughter is a healthcare worker. She works in a hospital. It's possible that she could pick up the virus at the hospital and transmit it to her child. She has a young child, my granddaughter. That's possible. Well, guess what? There are how many? Thousands, millions of doctors, nurses, people who work in hospitals all over this country. Do we think maybe they have children? Are we going to take the children away from all of those parents because they could possibly transmit the virus to their children? I mean, in what world does that kind of thinking make any kind of real sense? It doesn't.
It doesn't. In fact, all over the United States, we're doing the opposite of that. We are hailing healthcare workers and what they're doing. They're putting themselves and their family at risk. They're putting themselves on the line, and we should be hailing what they're doing and thanking them for what's going on, patting them on the back and taking care of them in whatever way we can, get them the equipment that we can, get them the materials that we can to fight this thing. You don't penalize them for being someone that's going out to help others that are ill and sick in these kind of difficult circumstances. It's a pat on the back, not a slap in the face. It's hard for me to imagine how this can happen.
Yeah, that's your reward. That's your reward for taking care of other people, for putting yourself in harm's way and not taking a leave of absence, quitting your job, secluding yourself in some corner. You're out there taking risks, and what's the reward you get? A judge signing an order like that. An ex parte order where the other side, the views of the other side aren't even considered. If he had a chance to listen to the other side, what he would have found out was that this father, in whose custody these children were then placed, his father who filed this emergency motion, happens to have some victim protective orders in place against him, both in favor of not only his former wife, but his current girlfriend. Both have these victim protection orders against him for strangulation and domestic abuse. I mean, so we're in the best interest of the child, this judge, according to the order signed by the judge, in the best interest of this child, he had to be taken away from his mother to be placed with who? I mean, what are we doing here? Why was it so necessary, so urgent, when there was no evidence that this mother actually had the virus, to, rush and order this in the middle of the night, stripping of custody from this mother without at least taking the time? All you had to do, if you're going to exercise some kind of reason, some kind of calmness, all you had to do is say, okay, we'll have a hearing tomorrow. We'll have a hearing in 2 days. We'll consider it, but I want to hear from the other side. No. That's not done. Are we, letting this whole thing, drive us to, unusual extremes? And why is that? Are we not, keeping the other person that we're affecting by these actions, the other people that are affected by these actions, sufficiently in mind? Are we not thinking that these other people who we are regulating or imposing restrictions on, are we not thinking that they're also, just like us, made in the image of God, and they deserve respect? Well, how about the executive director of emergencies program for the World Health Organization, a fellow by the name of Mike Ryan? He said, quote, "Now we need to go and look in families to find those people who may be sick and remove them and isolate them in a safe and dignified manner," close quote, Mr. Ryan said on March 22nd. What does that mean? What is he talking about? We need to go and look in families to find those people who may be sick and remove them, and then isolate them in a safe, in a dignified manner. Yes, we're going to be very dignified about this. They're going to come into homes. They're going to come into homes. He's talking about, you get and how are you going to know to do that? Well, it's going to be the same thing as this public park situation. Somebody's going to call up. They're going to get a complaint. Somebody's going to snitch on somebody else. And then the next thing you know, some authorities are going to show up, and they're going to pull somebody out of a home just like they pulled these kids away from this mother. I mean, is that really where we want to go with all of this? And why? This director of the emergencies program for the World Health Organization, why would he talk like this? Why would he think like this? I mean, well, to make any attempt to answer that would be sheer speculation. However, we could ask and speculate, well, if he had, if he had God in mind, if he had this idea that, well, as someone with civil authority over other people, we should exercise that authority, bearing in mind that over all of us there is a God. I mean, St. Paul said this thousands of years ago, when the authority that people had over other people was in a master-slave relationship. It wasn't racially based. It was people of the same skin color, but still it was a master-slave relationship. People with the absolute authority over other people, like people in this country had absolute authority over other people. Now here it was one skin color over another, but it was so degrading. They had absolute authority over other people. And even in that context, which St. Paul was familiar with, he said, hey, if you're going to have that kind of authority, if you're going to exercise that kind of authority, do it bearing in mind that there is a God above who loves that other person, that controlled person, that slave, just as much as you. And you're going to have to answer for what you do to that other person. Do you think this director at the World Health Organization has that really in mind? Or is he perhaps more thinking along the lines of a socialist kind of a mindset where, it's really all about us, and we control other people, and people are good. People are good, and it's the social circumstances that we need to regulate. And so what these civil authorities do is fine because they're good people. And they don't have to think about whether or not their actions are good actions. They don't have to take a mirror to themselves because people are good and they're good. And so, all we need to do is focus on the circumstances. And the circumstances are such that, hey, you've got this virus. Maybe somebody in a house has the virus. We're going to get them. It's just managing the circumstances, and we don't have concern or compassion for the people. Is that really the world that we want to build for ourselves?
Well, why would you go out? I mean, I'm a practical guy. I'm an engineer, right? Classically trained to take on what I need to take on in order to get the problem solved. Why would you go looking for people that aren't coming in and self-reporting? Why do you go out and add to the problem rather than allow people to say, yes, I'm sick, I need help? We are struggling to have enough workers and enough supplies to take care of those that are sick and that are coming and asking. For goodness sakes, why do you go out and open up Pandora's box and go looking for additional people and put energy in that rather than putting your energy into taking care of the people that are showing up? We're putting off, Ray, at this point in time, surgeries for people. We look and say, if that's elective, we're going to stop. And that makes sense, right? My dentist quit serving because that's elective. All of that makes sense. Let's deal with the thing that we need to do, which is the coronavirus, and get this stopped. Why would you go out and look for people that may or may not? How do you know that? Why do you go out and spend energy rather than taking care of those that come in and say, I've got an issue, I've got a problem, I need help? I would be focusing on those at the front door knocking on the emergency room, not pulling people out of bedrooms.
I'll give you a personal example. So I've got somebody in the family. They've got a good friend, lives in Michigan, and he has a house on I guess a semi-private lake. I guess it's a relatively small lake. The people with houses around the lake, they all have these launches or little piers on the lake, and they all have boats on the lake. And so I don't know. I mean, a lot of these lakes, the people actually own to the middle of the lake or something like that. So they might even they certainly have legal rights to use the lake. But, in a lot of cases, these are not public lakes. They're semi-private or private. Anyways, there's this guy who lives on this lake, and, for all that, all his time at this house, he's been able to take his boat on this lake. Well, he got a ticket, a $500 ticket, because he was fishing on this lake in his boat out in the middle of the water somewhere.
Nobody near him?
No. He's on a lake. He's in a boat. I mean, is he really a threat to infecting other people or having other people infect him? Is there real rationale? Is there good reason for giving this guy a $500 ticket for fishing? I mean, for going out on a boat on what is essentially like, his own lake. I mean, in part, it's his own lake. Are we going too far? Does this make sense? If that doesn't make sense, why not? I mean, we hear these stories and we say, oh, okay, that's funny, that's strange. Or maybe that's a little overborne, but hey, But no, we should stop. Wait a minute. Why? We should ask the question, why? Well, somebody asked that question in Louisville, Kentucky. We've been talking about, these instances where there are perhaps, overreaching governmental actions against particular individuals. Could we find perhaps, if we're going to fill out Mr. Shafarevich's formula for, secular socialist mindsets and worldviews that stress, the human element as opposed to any kind of a God-oriented element. If we're going to fill out his formula and find the elements of his formula in our world today, here in America, in the midst of this coronavirus, well, besides just, actions against individuals, we've got to, look at whether or not, religion is being targeted. Is religion being targeted? Well, in Louisville, a judge said it was. There's a church there called the On Fire Christian Center, and they were preparing to hold some communal service in celebration of Easter. And how were they going to do it? Well, they were going to practice social distancing. They were going to only allow people to attend the service in cars in a parking lot. Again, you're a boat on a lake, you're in your car in a parking lot, not really a problem. I mean, the likelihood, I suppose, is it possible that someone could, maybe through your car ventilation system, maybe a microbe escapes and maybe it finds its way through another car's ventilation system? I suppose it's possible. But if a government is going to act reasonably, would they really say you can't do that? Because if you get to the point where you say you can't do that, well, I mean, we're almost not going to be able to, live. Even if you're staying at home, you're going to stay at your house. Well, you can't open the windows to your house. You can't run the air conditioner to your house. Maybe a microbe could escape through your HVAC system in your house. You could play these things out to ridiculous degrees where we couldn't basically, breathe anymore. Anyways, but the mayor of Louisville had issued an edict, and he had said, you can't have religious services even if you're in your cars. Well, this church filed a lawsuit, and they, filed the law asking for an emergency motion to have an injunction to stay against the enforcement of this edict by the mayor. And the judge granted it. And he wrote, at the beginning of the memorandum of his opinion, he wrote, on Holy Thursday, an American mayor criminalized the communal celebration of Easter. That sentence is one that this court never expected to see outside the pages of a dystopian novel or perhaps the pages of The Onion. But 2 days ago, citing the need for social distancing during the current pandemic, Louisville's Mayor Greg Fisher ordered Christians not to attend Sunday services, even if they remained in their cars to worship, and even though it's Easter. The mayor's decision is stunning, and it is, beyond all reason, unconstitutional. That was the opening, scathing paragraph from the memorandum of opinion written by this judge. This judge further went on to say, hey, as de Tocqueville wrote, religion, which among the Americans never directly takes part in the government of society. And mind you, this is what he wrote. When did de Tocqueville do his tour of the Americas? Was it 1820s, 1830s, but the early part of the 19th century? And he noted even then that even though religion never directly takes part in the government of society, It must be considered, according to this French reviewer of our society, an outside observer. He said it must be considered as the first of their political institutions. Well, if it never takes part, why would it be the first of our institutions in a political realm? Why? He said because it does not give them the taste for liberty. It singularly facilitates the use of it. It is, in fact, what is the backbone behind our taste for political liberty. And that is why Shafarevich wrote that socialist organizations, socialist movements need to curtail religion because it operates against any of these wide, comprehensive socialistic rules where you get to, regulate a society because religion gives people a taste for freedom. In any event, the judge, through this order, outstayed the enforcement of it because, you could park in parking lots at liquor stores, but not at churches. That didn't make any sense to the judge. You're treating religion differently than others. It didn't make sense. It's funny. He said that government has an interest not only in, preventing the spread of disease, but in also promoting religion easily. And he said basically, the public has a profound interest in men and women of faith worshiping together this Easter in a manner consistent with their conscience. The government has an interest in letting people worship consistent with their conscience. Basically, the government has an interest in letting people be free. So that was Louisville, Kentucky. Greenville, Mississippi did something similar, only they didn't have a chance to go to Mass before the police showed up and arrested people. There's a lawsuit that was filed after the fact. The attorney basically said, this was massively unconstitutional, but nevertheless, that's going to play out in the courts. But nevertheless, before that lawsuit had a chance to be filed, people were arrested, and why? Yes, the government has an interest, as the judge in Louisville, the Louisville case noted. It has a massive interest in maintaining the health of the people, and certainly this coronavirus case gives the government, a huge interest in trying to protect its population. But how it goes about that still has to be managed under the rights of the people. When the government issues an order, in serving this public safety interest, it still has to do that in a constitutional way. It still has to do that in a way that respects the rights of the people. It can't just throw out the Constitution.
One of the quotes of our founding fathers is they put this together knowing full well that religion was so important. And if I remember the quote right, it is that if we disregard freedom in the pursuit of order, we lose both and deserve neither. And the thought is, if you start taking things away from people just so that you can keep the order that you need in the moment, you have basically stripped the people of the ability to have those. And I think that's important. We have to think through whenever you're making any kind of criteria as to whether it really is taking care of other people, whether their interests are being taken care of and served as well as your own. And if you somehow have the belief that you get to selfishly decide what are the rules for all because of your office, you've made a grave mistake. I don't think that's a system that we believe in, and I think that that's of great difficulty. I think we have to be serving others, and like you've said, Ray, to me, while that should be something that we believe in the United States, it is certainly something that I devoutly believe as a Catholic, that our job is to take care of everyone, no matter whether they're rich or poor, black or white, male or female, young or old. Everyone deserves dignity, and everyone in God's eyes has dignity, and it is our job to serve them and to take care of them, not because we have some power to take advantage of them. And that's quite the difficulty.
there is a consistency between these constitutional rights to which we are accustomed here in the United States and the Christian principles that we've alluded to even, very briefly here in this program. Why do you have a Bill of Rights? Why do you have a Constitution which says people have the freedom to exercise to practice their religion as they want? People have freedom of speech. The people have the right to a free press. Why do we have these freedoms? It's because the thinking of our founding fathers was not socialistic. It was not government-based. It was people-based. It was based on the fact that individual people have value. They have intrinsic value. They may not have said, this is a government that's going to be based on God. The God is the reason for everything that we're doing. But nevertheless, they made rules that are consistent with the idea that people have this kind of value that comes from God. And so now we're finding, I guess the question is this coronavirus thing bringing out the fact that we're in the midst of a cultural shift, a cultural movement, a cultural contest in which these values, these basic Christian values, are going to be contested. That people want to maybe change this country in a way that is no longer consistent with that. It's no longer consistent with religion. It's no longer consistent with the idea of God. There's a county in California, Mendocino County, and they said, look, even if you do internet-streamed religious services, you don't have people in the church, you don't have groups of 50 or more, you don't have groups of 10 or more, you have a group of 10 or less in a church performing a Christian service, whether it's a mass or some other kind of service, and you have just the bare minimum people that you need in order to do that. And maybe you have a minister who's giving a sermon, and maybe you have somebody playing the piano, and maybe someone who's singing. So you've got, maybe half a dozen people in the church, maybe some attendants and whatnot. There is no singing allowed. Okay, you've got maybe a large church space. And in that large church space, which is, normally, fit for 500 people, 1,000 people, whatever that church is built for. And in that huge space, you've got maybe 6 people instead. Plenty of room for social distancing. Singing is illegal. Now, why would you do that? Well, when you sing, you're going to expend air more forcefully, right? And so maybe your microbes or whatever, your pathogens, they'll carry a greater distance. Okay, so instead of 6 feet apart, make them 12 feet apart. I don't know. Make them wear masks. Why, instead of searching for some other kind of alternative, some less intrusive alternative? That's a principle of constitutional law. If you're going to regulate constitutionally protected freedoms, and you have a government purpose that requires you to take steps in that area, you have to do it in the least intrusive way possible. You have to at least still try to protect those constitutional principles if there's a way, those constitutional rights of freedom, if there's a way to do both at the same time, right? Well, wouldn't having masks on a person singing, or maybe some greater distance, or, put up a plastic shield in front of the singer? I mean, there's got to be maybe some way of trying to do both. Why do you just come out with a blanket, no singing?
The only reason is that for you as a manager, that's easier, right? If you
I'll give you another explanation. I'll give you another one. It's easier. Sure, it's quicker, but also you don't care about those people's religious beliefs. I mean, it may not be important to you, but it's important to them. So that's part two, of this. Actually, we've settled the three of them. We've talked about. There's restrictions on business. There's restrictions on private property. There's restrictions on. A lot of these governors now have these rules where you can buy this, but you can't buy that. If you're physically in a store and you're already in the store, you can't buy certain things. and certain businesses can't be open. I mean, there's a lot of restriction of private property. There's a lot of restrictions of the individual. There's restrictions particularly oriented towards religion. So why? Well, Shafarevich, part of the lesson that came from Shafarevich is that, the whole Christian movement replaced mythology. You had societies governed previous to that by myths. People were led to follow certain rulers, a pharaoh because he was divine or what, they're based on certain myths. But the whole Christian movement was based on a historical reality. There was a man named Jesus Christ. He did rise from the dead. That's what we adhere to. So it replaced mythology. Well, if you're going to replace the God of the Christian faith, how do you do it? Well, you need an alternate mythology. You need to replace the historical reality with the mythology. Now, how are you going to do that? Well, because the state now is all good. And that's what people are being told and being led to believe. So the state's all good. And science is good. We have science now. And science is the answer to everything. Have you been noticing this as I have, that recently there are all these governors coming out making these references to science. Science. It's becoming like a mantra. Governor Newsom from California, as we contemplate reopening parts of our state, we must be guided by science and data. A joint statement issued by the governors of California, Oregon, and Washington basically said that they're going to be relying on health outcomes and science to guide their decisions. Governor in Virginia, Governor Northam, we've talked about several times on this program for some of the notorious things he's done. But anyways, Governor Northam has made it clear, according to his spokesman, that the state must make decisions based on science, public health expertise, and data. Governor of Michigan, also in the news, also for certain notorious things, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, that reopening the state's economy will be based on a data-driven approach based on facts, based on science, based on recommendations from experts. Science. Well, that's the new answer, isn't it? That's the new mythology. It's this belief in science is really a belief in man, a belief in men and women, that we're going to find the answers to everything. It's an elevation of the human being, the elevation of men and women. The men and women who work in these scientific fields, they're going to find the answers for us. And everything we do, all of our decisions now, these governors are saying, are going to be based on science. We are going to rely on us.
Well, one of the things always to keep in mind, Ray, and I express this to my students routinely, is just recall that it is God who made the universe, God who created it, and they are all God's rules. And following science, for us, quite often is difficult because we don't understand the rules. We don't know the way things were made, and we have to be just a little bit careful. Just remember that God himself is who made science. He made us, and he's the one that created all of it.
But if there's this penchant now to make all of these references to science, why would that be? Well, we can also find maybe some illumination in this. The governor of New York, commenting on the fact that their coronavirus cases were a lot less than normal, said the number is down, quoting, the number is down because we brought the number down. God did not do that. Faith did not do that. Destiny did not do that. A lot of pain and suffering did that. That's how it works. It's math. Now, why did he feel compelled to say God did not do that? Why are all these governors going around saying science, science, science? God has nothing, and now then Cuomo sort of explains it all. God has nothing to do with this. Why is that necessary? Why, and how do you know that God didn't have anything to do with it? There is an alternate narrative being presented. There's a myth that's being presented to replace religion. This is what explains the various elements of what's going on around us. If there are some things that seem like overreaches, some things that seem curious, some things that you can't understand, perhaps it may help if you sort of, consider that in the context of what we've been talking about. The people that are making these decisions are the same people who say, like the governor of Michigan, who say that abortion is right. The governor of Michigan actually said abortion is life-sustaining. Now, that's kind of a hard one to swallow. But there's an alternate narrative. There's an alternate world view that they have. We have to be mindful of it. We have to be able to recognize it so that we can talk about it, and that we can help, follow the recommendations of St. Paul, keep God in mind in what we do and how we act with one another. And so hopefully that's of interest to you. Hopefully that's of some help to you. Hopefully, that you've enjoyed listening to this program. We certainly enjoyed having you. We thank you for being here, and we hope you'll join us again. Until the next time, God's best blessings be with all of you. Bob, thank you again.
Thanks, Ray. Have a great day.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.